Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Day Zero podcast. This is episode 20. I'm Spectre, and with me is Z. And so we have a few notes before we get into some topics. Firstly, I've been getting back to the Android kernel debugging streams for any of you that might have caught it on the last Friday. I'm going to be doing that again this Friday, so we're going to be doing some more of the Android hacking stuff on Friday at 8 or 9 Eastern. It's going to be a little while, I think, before Z gets to what he wants to do. So yeah, we're going to be doing that for the next couple weeks, I think. And the other thing is, for the previous set of streams I did with the Android binder use after free, I'm probably going to be putting the video out for that on Wednesday. That's my target date. So I've been editing that and getting that together. So yeah, hopefully that'll be out on Wednesday. So I just wanted to get that out of the way before we jump into topics.
So can we get a little preview on that? How much time have you managed to cut out?
I've got it down to about, well, it's about 15 hours, so I've only cut out
Cut out an hour?
no, I've cut up the first two streams I did, I think. So I can't really give it too accurate of a timestamp yet because I still need to do the other two because I think I did four and the other two were a lot longer than the first two were. So it's gonna be more editing this week than what I've already done. So I don't want to give like an estimated time for it because I honestly don't know exactly how short it's going to be yet.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Did you have any pre-discussion notes?
No, I think we can jump right into it.
Okay, so the first topic we have is protecting users from government-backed hacking and disinformation. So this is a post put out by Google for their threat analysis group, which they call TAG, and it's mostly like a PR thing for Google, talking about things they're trying to do to mitigate attacks happening through their platforms on
Oh no, they don't really seem to talk too much about their mitigation. It's mostly talking about what they're doing. This is their. Okay, I guess the blog itself maybe it's their. Is it the security or safety and security group, or is it actually a TAG blog? I'm not actually sure about that. Either way, this is more just an analysis over what has happened in the past. I want to say they put out something like this every quarter.
Okay. I mean, I don't remember seeing it before, but maybe I have, and it's just.
Well, I don't think we've covered it before.
Okay, maybe that's why. But yeah, like some things they've talked about was monitoring and warning for state-sponsored phishing for journalists that opt into their advanced protection program, I think is what they call it.
Well, so the advanced protection program is more of it's an opt-in program that adds additional security to your actual Google account. I think if we open it up here, they actually kind of talk about what they offer for that. They brought this in. It's not super new. It is somewhat recent. I want to say a couple years. It enforces hardware 2FA. Yeah, I'm trying to quickly read this to remember kind of everything that does. It has a bunch of safeguards in there, but I think that's separate from the fact that the threat analysis group actually, does monitor several threat actors. They mention here specifically they have 270 government-backed groups from more than 50 countries that they monitor. I did find it interesting, they open up here with phishing there, just the fact that of the users that were targeted, where they mentioned they sent out 12,000 warnings to users in 149 countries, but that most of that is just phishing that they're seeing from the government-backed groups. Because, every time you hear about the government groups doing something, it's always, dropping O days or something like that. And here it's just what we see is they're phishing. They're, phishing for credentials as being the 90% of what happens.
So they have to be doing this through Gmail, obviously, right? Their
Google
Mail
accounts
stuff.
in general.
Yeah.
Phishing a Google account.
Yeah, but this doesn't. not everyone gets into this monitoring, right? Like, because they recommended in the article for like potential high value targets and journalists and stuff like that to sign up for the
When
advanced protection
no,
program.
that is that's known here. Over 90% of these users targeted. But I believe that they're recommending that high risk users. They're not saying that those people targeted were part of that protection program. That's kind of what I'm trying to say here. Is the protection program something you
Okay.
can go and opt into? But it's not that they're only monitoring it for these people. They're monitoring the threat group, and they see that the threat group's targeting people. Regardless of whether or not they're on this advanced protection program, they're monitoring the threat group, not the person that was targeted.
Okay, fair enough. I assumed it was people that were under the APP and they were putting out stats on that, but okay, that makes a bit more sense what
No,
you're
as
saying.
far as I'm aware,
So,
it's their like tag monitors the threat groups. They're just
okay.
encouraging people to use the advanced protection program because, I mean, it offers advanced protection. I don't remember everything it does. I'm not. I mean, I have Google. I have a Google account, of course. I'm not a Gmail user. I mean, most of my Google account is YouTube, so
Yeah.
I'm a little bit less worried about it. So I'm not enrolled in that, but I do remember when the program came out. It does have a number of good protections in there. A few things that might bite you in the ass in terms of like lockout and recovery, because they make that a fair bit harder, if I recall correctly.
Makes sense.
But yeah, kind of going back onto the target or back onto the topic though, of looking at this last quarter from July to September. I like I said, I'm surprised by the phishing aspect. Like just that was like, I mean, phishing's obviously going to be prevalent. Just when you're looking at specifically
State
government
sponsored,
yeah,
yeah.
it just surprised me a little bit. I'm sure if Antti were here, he'd probably tell us that, oh yeah, that's par for the course, because of course, I mean, governments aren't going to drop an O-Day on everybody, so I mean, might as well start easier and work from there as necessary.
Yeah, I guess
It
it's just not something you really think about too much.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting little write up there from them. They also talk about the Russian affiliate influence operations targeting Africa.
Yeah.
Use of basically use of fake news. We'll use that term here. Um,
Yeah, so that was the big thing, right? So the two big things I found in here were the phishing and the disinformation campaigns. And the disinformation campaigns I'm a bit more worried about just because it's it's less cut and dry than phishing is in terms of like what is phishing and like I'm worried about how much effort there is being put in to make sure that what they're going after is actually disinformation. You know what I mean?
yeah, so I mean, they do actually mention here. So they're talking about disinformation and this influence operation, and yet when you look at the numbers here in terms of like the Google account stuff, it's 15 YouTube channels. Well, they terminated the associated Google accounts, 15 YouTube channels. That's not a very high number.
No,
Like it's
not at
definitely
all.
lower than I would have expected it to be. At the same time, that does seem to indicate that this is a manual process, because a lot of the problems we seem to have with YouTube closing accounts are some AI deciding, oh yeah, this is fake, or this account deserves to be banned or whatever, and just flipping some switch in AI, just automatic, no real chance of appeal. Whereas this seems to be tag, their threat analysis group is looking at it, finding these accounts, determining that they're um associated with those misinformation campaigns, and then blocking them. So I don't really have any issue with this.
Okay. Yeah, it's just I'm just like I kind of want to make sure there's oversight in terms of people not using their like any biases they might have against a certain person or anything like that to
I mean, we
influence
could
that.
go into a much larger topic over what should or shouldn't be allowed by a platform. I'm not sure we want to dive into that at this
No,
point,
no, I'm
but
not saying we should, but I'm just saying like I think it's worth like
but if
keeping in mind that that is a potential issue that I think should
I'd say
be.
this is coming out of Tag, though. This isn't coming out of some automated system. This is. I wish Auntie was on this week's podcast. I don't think we actually mentioned it, but Auntie won't be joining us this week. Um, it would be nice to kind of have some insight onto that. But I mean, this is, threat intelligence. Like actual people who are looking at it, it's worth being concerned about that, but I don't see that as being an issue here, or even a potential issue until they start trying to automate it.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so we had a last minute addition today, which I actually didn't get too much of a chance to look at, which is the ENISA threat landscape for 5G networks. And you were saying you thought this one was interesting because I think we've talked about 5G before, especially with the European Union. So
Yeah,
did you manage to look at this too much?
well, I didn't get a chance to look at it too deeply, and unfortunately, I forgot to move all of our PDFs we can actually view them on here, so I can't actually pull it off, but I just want to bring this up. So this is actually over a week old, so we're kind of covering some older news. But it's basically just a coverage of the threat landscape for 5G. What I wanted to bring up, though, did you manage to look? I mentioned about page 72.
No, I didn't manage to look at the PDF itself.
Okay, well, the only thing I actually wanted to mention out of it was the one page.
Yeah, you were saying it had you found it interesting in terms of threat modeling. Like there was a really interesting.
Oh no.
Or...
So yes, it's an interesting document, and I'm able to pull it up so people can see, but unfortunately, you're not going to be able to interact as we normally would.
Aw.
So, page 72. I just thought it was funny that page 72 has this list of, well, obviously it's an error. They say threat agents, but it's a threat agents. They have a list of who are the people that are going to be attacking 5G. And I mean, for everything in this document, and I mean, it's not a bad overview of kind of the threat landscape for 5G. It's not just like malicious stuff either. They cover a lot. It's just threats against it. So anything that might take it out, whether or not that be like natural disasters or intentional attacks against it. Like, so it's a good document for that. But their threat agents that they bring up here are cyber criminals, insiders, nation states, hacktivists, cyber fighters, cyber terrorists, corporations, and script kiddies.
They didn't leave anyone out, did they?
Who else? Yeah, who else is there except maybe to say white hats?
Yeah,
which
mean,
isn't
they
as much of a threat. Like, it's just, and they're all so generic. It's like, I know with doing these things, with writing up the threat model, like, it is being generic. You are covering that, but it's just like, who's going to attack it? Everybody's going to attack it. Like that's what they're saying here. So I want to kind of point that out. I don't want to get into a full discussion because I haven't had a chance to read all of this.
Okay, fair enough.
And oh no, it just seems like more of an overview. It looks pretty solid, and I don't have many complaints from what I've read coming out of the various EU groups that have been looking at 5G. I think we've covered a couple things in the past. Honestly, it looks like a good overview. That's about all I'm really going to be able to say about it, though, at this point. I just want to call it that really generic list that they have.
Yeah, I mean, even the fact that you said that they covered both natural disasters and targeted attacks, it seems like a very broad,
it's very the threat broad landscape, overview, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of key. It's the landscape of the threats. It is supposed to be broad. It's not just about what things are going to, like what attackers are going to do. I mean, obviously that section, they do have a section about attackers and what attackers may do. But
yeah. I mean, one thing I wonder is like, is it fair to really include script kiddies as part of the threat model? Because like, how many script kiddies are going to be going after 5G? It seems like kind of a
I mean, as soon as there are exploits out for it, yeah, people are. I mean, think about all the people that will go and buy like an IMSI catcher or whatever now, just to kind of do that and not really needing a whole lot of knowledge to do it. It maybe does come down to what you consider a script kiddie, because I mean, it's to some extent there's hardware involved here now too.
Yeah, I just like when I think of script kiddie, I think of people that are, it just seems like 5G is a bit less accessible to people like that, but I could be wrong there. This is another thing. Where
it's still maybe, but as soon as there's exploits available, you're going to have the traditional script kiddie. I tend to take the opinion of taking script kiddie as just those that basically don't develop their own exploits but use what's readily available.
Without
Or
understanding how it
you,
works.
well, I don't necessarily. I mean, so I would still consider somebody that goes around and does like a basic SQL injection to be a script kiddie. If they go around, doing a single, I mean, it's not working so much anymore with a lot of websites, but you go around doing that classic like single quote or some Google Dork style SQL injection testing. You might understand how SQL injection works in order to do that exploit, but I would kind of draw that line on the fact that they kind of stick with what they know as an attack. So they know SQL injection, so they just go around testing that one thing rather than being able to develop anything really on their own. Oh no, that is kind of a separate discussion.
Yeah, still those one I would kind of like to have because the definition is a bit loose. But yeah, we'll leave that for another day. We'll jump on to the next European Union based topic, which is the EU raising eyebrows at possible U.S. encryption ban. So this kind of ties back a little bit with what we talked about last week with banning crypto, and so I don't want to go into too deep of a discussion because we did kind of go into that last week.
Yeah,
So
we didn't go too deep into it last week though. Last
no, but
week, I
we could
mean, we
talk
touched
about
on
like
Interpol. I think the difference here with this one is it's more the hit back on if the US were to. So last week we actually had Interpol, which, I mean, technically international, but generally speaking, I at least associate them more with Europe. Um, Kind of coming out saying, yeah, there should be backdoors in encryption, basically. Whereas this week, what we're dealing with is the EU generally disapproving of the idea of the US being able to read encrypted files. So the issue there being just simply that, US law enforcement obviously has their worries that targets, criminals, terrorists, whatever, can go dark by using end-to-end encryption.
yeah,
So
yeah.
with the EU, you've got GDPR, General Data Privacy Regulation. I'm not sure
It's
actually.
very long. Yeah.
Either way, they've got that for protecting users' privacy. So if you were to store data in the US and the US required that, encryption have those back doors, would that be a violation of GDPR? If the US brings in this type of restriction, are they basically going to be saying now we cannot store data for European users, basically?
That's an interesting point of view.
So that's kind of what more they're bringing up here with their raising eyebrows at possible US encryption is, this can be a violation of GDPR, and it hasn't been tested in their courts yet, so it may or may not be. That said, I mean, it does raise questions over will companies leave the US? Part of me wants to hope that they would if the US brought it in, because I mean, Australia brought in this crypto law earlier in the year. And and a number of companies did leave Australia after that. That said, the US is such a dominant force, I can't imagine, companies leaving. But at the same time, I would like to think that some of them would kind of, care about their users enough.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. is such a big market where I think there were even companies that were based in Europe that moved to the U.S. So
Well,
it's
so it's
like,
not quite, it's more about where the data is being stored, though. I mean, you could still have
okay.
access to the US market without needing to store everything in the US.
Oh yeah, no, I mean like companies really want to move to the U.S.
Well, yeah, they want to move to the
That's what I
US,
mean.
though, to have the US market access.
Okay.
So
So
that's why I mean, like, they can still maintain that even if they're not storing data in the US.
so they would just move their data centers to European Union countries.
Although then you have the latency issues. Like, that isn't a good solution to anything. And
Yeah.
I mean, most companies don't want to do that because obviously there's GDPR, so that adds a lot of restrictions on what you can and can't do in terms of the
Man, this
data
is a
there.
complex issue. I mean, this could all be avoided if the U.S. just, you know, stopped being stupid and decided not to even consider an encryption ban.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. On one hand, there's the concern about criminals going dark, because that's the term that they use in the document. And that makes sense. Like, that is obviously a clear concern. But at the same time, there are other means to go dark. There are other means to have that private communication, and that those means have existed for quite a while. I mean, all through the Cold War, you had, dead drops and all of that, and I mean, that is a means of basically private communication. There was no attempt to ban a dead drop.
I mean, even if you ban crypto, they're still going to use it. Like,
That's
all
yeah,
crypto
that's
is
the other
math,
thing.
right? Like, all you're going to do is prevent the people who want to use it for good things from using it. you know?
Yeah, I
Like,
mean that's kind of one of the standard things. I don't like saying, "Oh, well, it's just math." I mean that's dumbing it down way too far.
okay, yeah,
I mean it's kind of
but
like
what I mean is,
the
it's like
illegal number.
I mean, what I should say is crypto is kind of, it's like an idea. You can't really ban an idea. Like,
Yeah, but I mean if you ban everybody that from implementing it, I mean
but
they
how are
can.
you going to do that though? Like, it's not practical to even enforce that.
Uh, Look at China.
Hmm. Is China, is that more because of other things though than it is encryption? Like,
Oh,
I don't know. It's kind of
I'm
a
not saying their
complex.
purpose is that. I'm saying it is like it's technologically possible to start banning stuff, and especially if you do start enforcing it on the US companies or companies that deal with US data and banning US citizens from using those services that aren't in compliance. Like there are ways to do it. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen if they try and ban it. All I'm really getting at is there are means to do so,
Oh
especially
yeah,
if they want to be kind of fascist about it.
that's what I mean with what you were saying though. Like, yeah, you can absolutely ban companies fairly easily, and you can punish them with fines or whatever. But like, they're talking about targeting like terrorists and stuff like that. How are you going to stop somebody individually in their own home from using encryption when you don't have like a lockdown internet like you do in China? It just doesn't seem like.
Have a lockdown internet.
All
But I mean, no,
right.
that's kind of something I mentioned last episode. It's all like the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah,
It's like this is
exactly.
already out there, so people are still going to use that. And I just think like this is the first time where the government has kind of been able to watch all of the dark communications going by and know that it's there, know that they're not going to be able to read it. With the things I was saying in the past, like with dead drops, the whole part of the point of them was that ideally somebody watching somebody make a dead drop shouldn't be able to tell a dead drop actually happened. It's supposed to be subtle. So, there it took a lot more investigative work. Now it's like they know it's there. And it's just like that box that they can't open. So I like it's a tantalizing thing to be able to open that. So this is kind of tying it back to I kind of get where you know law enforcement is coming from, but the whole idea of due process is so that law enforcement doesn't always get the easy way to figure things out. They have to go through due process, or they have to provide people kind of that due process and take get a warrant for whatever whatever they have to do. I'm not my area, but like we have that process in place explicitly to make it harder on the police. So then, US law enforcement coming and saying, well, this makes it harder for us to do our job. So, it's working. Or it's working as it should.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything more to add on that. I think you kind of hit it on the head with the way you summarized it up there. But for anyone who is interested in a bit more discussion, we did talk about it on last week's episode as well. So you can see the YouTube link below the stream, and then just check out episode 19. There's timestamps in the description, so you can go to where we talked about Interpol and we talk about some encryption stuff there too. Okay, so next thing is watching TV. But you're not just watching TV. Apparently, your TV's watching back.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a new revelation. But I
No.
figured it was worth maybe bringing up here in case one you weren't aware of it. That it is kind of a growing thing, and especially with Black Friday, TVs are a popular item to buy. TV sets, as this kind of thing goes into, ever wonder why the TV sets are getting so cheap? And part of that has to do with the manufacturers aim to make a profit off of knowing what you watch.
Yeah, so I will say, this title is a little bit clickbaity when you look at it. At least when I looked at it initially, it kind of sounds like they're talking about cameras being embedded into the TV or something. That's not what this article's talking about. This article's talking about monitoring what you're watching for, like, marketing and advertising and stuff like that, which is not nearly as egregious, I don't think.
Yeah, fair point. Although we have had cases in the past where the smart, like where the microphones on a smart TV have been kind of constantly listening. I don't want to name any companies because I don't remember which ones were doing this, but uh, it has happened in the past. But yeah, this is a little bit clickbait. At the same time, it's a news article. It's not like one of our technical papers or anything.
No, it's not. I mean, I'm not really defending it, but I mean, I think this is another case of where I don't think a lot of people are really going to care, to be honest. I don't think people really care if marketing firms and stuff know the types of shows know the type of content you watch to try to market ads towards you better. I honestly don't think people are really going to care about that too much.
Yeah, I
Do
mean
you?
they actually mentioned that right in this paper. Um, I have the quote here. The basic attitude was, and this is a quote, um, that Google tracks everything I do. He says, if Samsung or Vizio know that I watch Blackish or The Tonight Show, who cares? If anything, the attitude was good. Maybe my favorite show won't get canceled if they know I'm watching. So that's coming. It is. Yeah, there we go. That's coming right out of quote here. I guess they looked about concerns in 2017 about the automated content recognition. I do want to mention here, I actually wasn't aware of how content recognition worked for this, and I thought it was kind of an interesting. It totally makes sense when they kind of point out. But basically, what they're able to do is compress kind of what's on your screen every small period of time down essentially 4 by 4 square, like a pixel. It'll average the colors out, and then it will compare kind of as those colors change. So your 30-second clip have kind of a database of other 30-second clips, and they're able to kind of figure out what you're watching through a database of known media. So if you're watching any unknown media, they wouldn't be able to match it.
Okay. I did have one kind of interesting question to cap off this article. I don't know if you really. I don't think it's mentioned in the article or anything, but they're saying it's targeting ads, right? To try to target people to show them ads that are more relevant to them and stuff like that for marketing. I wonder how that fares in regards to that COPA law that YouTube's getting hit with lately, because you can't target advertisements towards kids with the COPA law. So is this compliant with that? Because how is the TV going to know the age or the demographic of who's watching?
No, it's not quite about you can't target ads to kids. What it's more about is you can't build up a profile about a child. It's the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act. It's the same thing where it's like you have to do that little checkbox to say you're at least 13 or 14 or whatever to register. That's COPA also.
Okay.
So the idea is more that if they know they've got a child there, they can't like build up this child's profile. But when you're dealing with a family or something, you can build up a family's profile. They watch X, they do Y. As long as you're not collecting personal information or personalized information about a child. So when you start having the media that is child directed on YouTube, and they're building up the marketing profile, like connecting the YouTube with everything else that they do, that's where I believe the issue comes in. And I'm going to say I am not a lawyer, so I very well may be mistaken. But that was kind of my understanding of the COPA stuff, which... so I don't know if something new has happened with that or why exactly Google's just worrying about now, because it's not a new act. I think it was like 96 or something. Maybe it's even earlier than that. I'm not entirely certain, but like it's been around since I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I think with YouTube, the reason was they had like a dispute or whatever in the courts, and it finally got settled, and that's why they had to make all these abrupt changes. But
Oh,
yeah, I
okay.
mean, I yeah, it's not really mentioned in the article, and maybe I'm completely off base with it. It was just a personal thing that I like thought of. As soon as I see anything with ads and stuff like that, I start thinking about that now, especially with all the YouTube stuff going on. But yeah, like neither of us are lawyers, so
Yeah, no,
I
it's a
can't give
fair
too much of a
it's a fair
opinion on that.
point though. And perhaps you're right that they shouldn't be doing game marketing, but I mean there is marketing on like children's TV. There are advertisements, there are restrictions to how often ads can be run. And I think there's even a requirement that they have to run like X hours ad free and things like that too when they have children's stuff. So you might be somewhat right in terms of limiting the ads, but I don't think it's just straight up you can't have ads. It's more about protecting that profile, that kid's privacy until they're old enough to kind of understand. One thing that just when I mentioned, like, Google already tracks everything I do. I feel like we've really normalized that privacy loss, or we've normalized privacy loss in general because of Google. I mean, I don't know if you'd remember it, but there was an outrage over like, when Gmail introduced text ads that actually kind of related to the contents of your email.
I think I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's a time where people got outraged over that. Now it's just expected. Google knows everything you're doing.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it creeps up so slowly. They've been doing it like subtly over the years where people have slowly stopped caring.
Yeah.
It's yeah, I mean, especially like it's not only just like the kinds of emails and stuff now, but they track like obviously they track location data. They track a lot of shit, man. Especially like Google's probably the worst for it.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, Google, obviously, Facebook's got a lot of information. I think Google captures so much of your digital life, though, because, everybody either uses Google Ads, Google Analytics. Like, basically, every site you visit, there's something connected to Google being loaded. Or you're just using Chrome.
and then you also consider like Android phones. The Photos app that works through Google stuff as well.
Yeah, what they do
So
face recognition on the Photos app, too. Or on some of them, at least, so...
yeah, yeah, I mean you're right. It is kind of getting normalized, and maybe we should be a bit more like I was saying at the beginning that it wasn't as egregious because it's just what you watch, but maybe that's because there is more egregious stuff going on that we don't even consider it that bad.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, I mean, sometimes, like, I'm not I'm not entirely against advertising, but I just don't like the feeling when it gets so personal advertising directly to me based on that. Like maybe I don't want them to know, I watch some show or, in my case I just don't watch TV, but
Yeah.
you know, I I can understand like somebody wanting some privacy over that. Like maybe uh or maybe if we go a little bit more dystopian, maybe you watch or maybe it could be used for like detecting that you're watching something that is anti-government. Watching a YouTube video that's anti-government. Like if you're watching a full screen or whatever, they can potentially detect that. It's because these are smart TVs, not just normal TV content. So getting a little bit more dystopian, there is kind of that anti-government or the government kind of cracking down on what you're watching too.
Yeah, one thing kind of related to what you were saying that I thought was interesting was apparently Netflix didn't want these TVs to collect data on its app usage and what shows people are watching on that, so they don't on Netflix. I thought that was cool. Like they respected.
Or they just wanted the monopoly on their own app's data.
Well, yeah, maybe that. That's the more cynical view, probably. True. But yeah, like that is like a kind of an interesting point that's kind of buried in the article. It's not really highlighted anywhere, but I saw that and I was like, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, they are like you said, it's smart TVs. They are looking into apps, and there's many more than just Netflix. So
Yeah,
yeah.
so I think we could probably move on from that though.
Oh yeah, definitely. So the next thing is the common weakness enumeration CW top 25. CWE top 25. It's been updated for the first time in what is it? 8
Yeah,
years?
well, so the last one was the 2011 CWE Top 25. Obviously,
Yeah.
this isn't quite as popular as OWASP Top 10. But I did think there were some interesting changes this year.
Yeah. So this year we'll kind of I'll list like the top 3 because I think they're the most interesting. Is so number 1 at like 75 is improper restriction of operations within a memory buffer. So like buffer overflow via operations happening inside of it. The second one, which is quite a bit lower in score, is cross-site scripting, and then the third one is improper input validation, which is a little bit vague. But
Well, so
I,
that's kind
I've
of the big change with this year. They've brought in several, or they've allowed kind of the more general categories to be included, some very generic ones. Like I think improper restriction of input, or sorry, of operations within the bounds of a memory buffer. I think that's pretty vague itself.
yeah
But then you have uh, information exposure. That's another fairly generic thing.
yeah, and I mean there's
Uh,
overlap, right? Like improper restriction of operations in a memory buffer, and then out of bounds read. Both of those can overlap. You
yeah,
can have
improper
like
authentication is another one. Like that's very generic.
yeah
That said, so that's one of the big changes there. I actually think the most interesting things are later on, like not in the top 3. Although out of the
okay
top 3 compared to last year, what's interesting is there's a very significant move to have more binary issues floating up in these CWEs.
I noticed that too.
Um, if you take a look at what was up last year, or not last year, the last one, the 2011 one, like the top 3 were SQL injection, OS command injection, and classic buffer overflow. Then cross-site scripting in 4th. So 3 of the top 4 were. I mean, technically, you can have SQL injection, you can have OS command injection, you could have those in your standard desktop applications or your network services. They absolutely exist there, but you can kind of associate them more with kind of the web style attacks and the web exploitation. Whereas this year, we've obviously got a fair bit less of those issues. We've still got cross-site scripting, SQL injections dropped, OS command injections dropped. Like a lot of them have dropped. They still exist. CSRFs actually come up. But it's just interesting that a lot more binaries come up. And so a couple of the things that I was kind of interested in is the fact that now we have, I think, out of bounds read. Out of bound read wasn't present in the last one. Neither was like UAFs.
Huh, interesting. Okay.
So I
Yeah, I
think
didn't
it's
even notice that.
interesting to see those coming up. And now we've got the drop off of I think integer overflows kind of dropped off the list, but we have UAF. Oh no, we do have it. No, overflows are actually quite a bit higher. My bad. But yeah, the out of bounds read and the use after free I thought were really interesting that they kind of jumped up there. They're very binary focused issues. And I think that actually kind of reflects what I've seen in terms of just the resurgence of people interested in the binary aspect, interested in kind of the exploit development at that level. In 2011, we're just starting to kind of get kind of the jailbreak scenes. Obviously, with the iPhone, I think was first released in 08, so kind of the growth of smartphones. The PS3 come out in what 08? I want to say too. No, I don't remember what year it came
I
out
think you're pretty
before that.
close. I think it was 2007 for Japan
Yeah,
and 2008 for North America or something like that. But yeah.
yeah, so late 07. Either way, like kind of in that area a little bit beforehand. And then obviously I think jailbreaking kind of had more of an explosion with the PS4, with kind of the current gen, and with as kind of Android and everything grew. As smartphone use grew, and I think that's kind of fed into kind of younger exploit developers coming in, people getting into it in their teens and carrying on from there, and kind of bringing up more of the binary stuff, because there was this gap where everything was kind of web focused. Obviously, there has been binary stuff all along, but I don't know. I've kind of noticed a resurgence out of that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but I think another major aspect of it is just that some of the low hanging fruit is getting chopped off. SQL injection, I think, probably fell pretty hard, especially when PHP completely removed the old SQL API that was very vulnerable to SQLI, right? Like it's not even, you can't even use it anymore in PHP 7, I don't think.
I think you can use it, but you have to kind of add it yourself. It's not there by
Okay.
default.
So yeah, so stuff like that, and then people using frameworks and stuff that have matured and gotten rid of a lot of those bugs. I think it's a lot of low hanging fruit dying, and a lot of the low hanging fruit that's on the list was web stuff like SQLI, XSS. Those are pretty
I mean,
most of
XSS
the
is
time
still
low,
quite common. Not as
quite
easy,
common.
but still quite common.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I could agree with that. But like SQL injection, OS command injection, I could definitely see why they would fall off pretty hard. Um, do they actually say if there's something else though? Like, do they actually say if there's any factors that contributed to more binary being on the list? Because this list seems a little bit weird, and the reason I say that is their scores, like first score being 75 and second score going down to 45 real quick, and then in the 2011 one there was 75, and then
Yeah, so
or
they do
sorry, it was
talk
93
about.
and then 83. So it kind of
Basically, it comes down
steep.
to like how they calculate it is based on how frequent, or the severity and how frequent the CWE was attached to a CVE.
Okay,
So
so
they kind of have the whole how they've counted it on
so
the
that
page
might be
there.
it too.
But so part of it comes down to the fact that more people are kind of aware of like out of bounds reads, especially after like Heartbleed.
Yeah,
And like use after freeze, more people are kind of reporting those longer exploit chains, the going after the kernel or something, where you're seeing UAF more often.
yeah.
Those were two factors that they do mention as to why um,
Okay.
some of the binary stuff has kind of come up a little bit more often. They do talk about, and that's two of the things that they've mentioned.
This could also explain a little bit of why binary is more dominant at the top of the scores in the 2019 CWE list, because you'll find that binary CVEs, they'll typically, I think they, I think it's fair to say they typically have higher scores, like CVSS scores
But this
than
didn't
web.
change this didn't change during the 2011 one. They still use CVEs for that too.
Yeah,
Like
but
it's
like you
not like that
said, since
changed.
there's more binary CVEs being reported and their higher score, that kind of gives them more of an edge. You know what I mean?
Like
If that
I
makes
know
sense.
I know what you're saying. I'm just saying I disagree. Um,
Okay.
just because they use the same thing. Like, yeah, CVs were getting reported in 2011 too. It's not new. CVs were
Definitely.
being reported. CVs still had high CVSS scores. Especially with binary applications. So there is a bit of a bias, I think, towards CVs mostly being reported on binary applications, but that didn't change between 2011 and now. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you that it's mostly because there's more interest in binary and there's more reports for it. It's just that I think that is a factor into, how the score could be impacted by that. You know what I mean?
could
By
be.
how binary's higher.
I don't think there's been enough of a change in that to think that explains it. Like, I think just the recalculation method that they're doing makes a big part of that because they did change the formula.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. But yeah, that list is pretty interesting. I mean, I don't want to go into too like
Well, I
a
don't
rant.
want
I
to
think I
list
talked
the
about it
entire.
before.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm not gonna list the entire thing. I was just gonna say like CWE. I don't like the fact that, like you said, they included some of the higher abstract, like I should say more vague CWEs. That is one thing I don't like about CWEs. I don't like the more vague ones. Like improper input validation can be literally anything.
It
That
can
could
be,
be a
but
number
I
of
mean,
issues. So
but they also like if you go, where is that? If you go and actually, visit that CWE's page, though, you get kind of all the things related to that. I mean, CWE's kind of a way of classifying that, and it has a hierarchy. So yeah, at the top, things are going to cover more things than at like the specific, but I don't think that invalidates or makes it any less valuable, just because there's kind of the more generic
Yeah,
entries in there. I do kind of agree that in terms of doing the top 25, it does feel out of place to include like those really generic ones, because obviously they're going to be attached to a lot of issues. But I don't use that as anything to speak against CWEs, because CWEs have that hierarchy. If you want to dig down, you can, but you can also see like, hey, this is this type of issue. Well, what do I, you find though, you have your one specific issue, you find it's CWE. What's kind of the root cause, or what's higher on the hierarchy? Oh, well, this issue is of this type. Oh, what's that type? And can you fix it at that level? Can you just fix all input validation issues all at once? No, but in theory, you could use that to kind of find higher level issues, more impactful issues.
yeah. I mean, I should have been more clear. I wasn't trying to go after CWE specifically. I just meant that list. So basically, what you were saying, where I wish they used the lower levels in the hierarchy in the list instead of the more vague higher numbers.
Yeah, I guess
Um,
there's kind of the question of how do you do that? Like, how do you decide between it automatically?
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm not sure how you.
Like, either you whitelist or you blacklist. Like, obviously, there's a way to do it. Yeah.
Could be a fun exercise. To do it as a little project, send it to them.
No, I think we have different ideas of fun.
Okay, fine. Well, we'll move on to some exploits. So,
Yeah.
antivirus exploitation, LPE and K7 security. So, as you can probably guess, this was actually, okay, I actually jumped ahead. We're actually on weak encryption cipher. I'm sorry. You probably were going to bring that up, right?
Oh, I was just going to keep rolling with it.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll jump back. I jumped ahead. I
Yeah,
jumped the gun.
Forinet. This made the rounds pretty well over social media, so I feel like most people here are going to um already have heard about this. Just as you've got this Fortinet and their various products. What they do is they send information, and it sends some basic information like your product and your serial number, product ID, but it also sends in terms of looking for malware and stuff. It will send all the URLs that you're visiting, email information. Sends this off to its own endpoint. Not quite plain text, but basically just using a simple XOR with a hard-coded key. So effectively
Awesome.
plain text, but technically not. And if you're not familiar, like XOR is one of the kind of fundamental symmetric crypto primitives. So it's very well used, like AES. Everything on the symmetric side tends to use or build off of XOR. Key thing there being that it builds off of it. It doesn't just use it on its own. And in theory, the perfect encryption is actually just XORing with a actually random key of the exact size of your data, and that you can't reuse the key. Like, there's restrictions over that. The one-time pad, you can't, in realistic terms, you're not implementing that on a computer, and just using XOR is just a bad idea. Especially with a hard-coded key, very easy to break. You can break it pretty much just by looking at a bunch of the data that's come through it that's been encrypted. Look at it in a hex viewer, you can break the key.
I mean, yeah, there's low point CTF challenges that do this stuff. So
yeah, it's literally something you can do by looking at it.
Yeah. So the type of information they say can be MITM'd when you break the crypto is like the product type, the unique identifier. So you can use that to.
Well, so not just MITM'd. It's not just man in the middle. As long as you have access to the traffic. So in theory, I mean, that could just be somebody with log access too.
Fair enough.
Can break that.
Yeah, I just know they mentioned
Yeah, like
NYPM
your
directly, I
big
think.
concern is still MITOM. Like that's still kind of one of the big things, but it's not actually a necessary part of it because it's just sending the data. It's a one-way thing.
Yeah,
So just observing's fine.
yeah. So it seems like the big concern that they list here is gathering intelligence on a company. If you were going to do like recon on it, try to figure out which products they're using, and then you can use the unique identifier to track an individual as well. And they also mention you can get like the full URLs of web surfing through the web filter, which I think is actually a bigger issue.
Yeah,
Um,
I would care. I would care a lot less about this if it were just the product information. Like obviously that's still
yeah,
sensitive information, but when it's email information and the full URLs, that gets a little bit more sketchy to me.
I found it interesting with email and antivirus data. They say unspecified. They don't really go into specifics of like what type
Yeah,
of
and I
data
didn't
is
dig
leaking.
into what it was. I can't imagine they're sending like entire messages. It's probably more like metadata related, or they just didn't figure out what it was either.
Yeah, okay. So they have a Python POC, and as you can see, it's really simple, as we were saying uh, with the it's pretty much a CTF challenge. The other thing you pointed out was that the timeline was kind of ridiculous, considering it was such a trivial issue. It took them almost a year to fix it.
Well, more than a year to fix it.
Well, to be fair, so it seems they shipped the fix quicker for one product than they did for another. Like they fixed it for 6.2 in early 2019, but it took them until November to fix it on the 40OS branch 6.0. And it's kind of weird that there's such a large gap between the two versions there.
Yeah, I mean, and it is. I mean, it is such a long pipeline. So my feeling is kind of one of two things kind of happened with that. One is that this is fairly low severity, to be fair. I mean, this isn't compromise. Like this isn't giving somebody remote code access or execution. Um,
Yeah, there's a pretty
while it
high
is a
precondition.
while it is a practical attack, you do need to be in a position to capture that network traffic. So it isn't like a high severity. So I get like them not responding, like fixing it in a day, because they have to roll this out obviously to a bunch of what I'm presuming are a lot of enterprise clients that don't like updates. So they have to test it. They have to make sure nothing's going to break. They're still collecting all the same data, performance-wise, and I mean, I do kind of get the performance thing. HTTPS can be like a big load. That said, I mean, it's 2019. It's not that much of an issue, but it can be, especially compared to just XORing it. The client has to. But I mean, there's another solution, which is the client can use public key crypto. So but I mean, there are the performance issues on the server, so I could understand there being some concerns over how do they kind of release this update so the enterprises aren't going to run into any issues.
Okay.
So like I can get it. So what I think may have happened is this being a low severity issue just kind of got bumped off as something that they were going to work on once they've kind of hit all their feature requests, like all of their new features for the next version. Then they're going to, right before they release a new version, go and hit up some of these low severity things, such as this one. So I think it could have just got pushed off because of that sort of metric being used.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think it's still kind of too long. I think it's worth criticizing that with how long it took from contact, and you can see like it's actually a pretty detailed timeline. I want to give them credit for that. Like
Yeah, well, I mean,
sometimes you don't get that detailed of a timeline, so
one thing
it's pretty cool.
one part of it I found interesting though is the fact that they had a request for a conference call like 3 months afterwards and needing multiple conference calls discussing the technical details. This isn't that hard of an issue.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that they use a static key like that. Like, I don't know why they wouldn't at least use like a generated key or something that was tied to the license or something at least. But even then, like, it still wouldn't be great. But yeah. just kind of a silly issue
Yeah,
that
well,
took a while to
in
fix.
terms of using like a custom key, part of the issue comes down to if it's centralized, like if they're the ones doing this collection and it's not like hosted in house, then they need to know what that product is in order to know what key to use to decrypt it.
Okay,
So
fair enough.
that's why I think public key would have been better.
All right,
They have an
so we'll.
endpoint that
Oh,
publishes
sorry. Go ahead.
their that's why I think the public key would be better because they will publish a um maybe have an endpoint that publishes what their public key is, and then everything can use that. You have all the normal and public key crypto protections. Like I feel like that probably would have been the best route to go.
Sorry,
Not
can you just
so
repeat the last couple seconds? I just wanted to hear what you said there.
public key crypto. That's all that matters out of it. It's public key crypto, but we can move on. You're not able to hear me.
Okay. So yeah, we'll move on to LPE and K7 security. So I kind of jumped the gun going to this immediately, but we got around to it. So this I thought was pretty cool because I've always thought of antivirus as an interesting target for exploitation, and he actually directly mentions why in the article. So in target selection, he says that antiviruses are a pretty attractive target because they operate in a privileged context, and a lot of antiviruses, they're going to have a driver. So a driver, because it runs in kernel mode, if you can attack an antivirus and get code execution, it's pretty much an LPE. So antiviruses are a very interesting target for that. That being said, the one he targeted, K7, I haven't really heard of it before. Have you heard of it before, Z?
No, I was not familiar with it.
Yeah, okay. So I didn't really hear of it before, so it's probably a lesser used antivirus. Just because I haven't really seen anyone mention it before, so it's probably more prone to these types of issues. There's also a few limitations in terms of being a practical attack. There's some privilege barriers. I think you need some access already to be able to control bits of the registry data, which is what the attack is.
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
In terms of
Do you
what
want
you
to go to
need,
that?
well, that's kind of the thing. Part of the issue that they have is that there are privileged registry keys that are being used. In particular, it adds its privilege appinit underscore DLL entry to a protected key, so that whatever DLL they want gets loaded into the application, and it is privileged. But part of their attack here is what they're able to do is through sending kind of IPC between the user land and the system process that it runs. They're able to tell it what registry keys to change. So it's basically like an IPC call that's like, here's the registry key, here's its new value, and the system process will go and do that. So the user can overwrite any registry key by sending the right IPC. So that's without privilege.
Okay. But yeah, it does seem like less of a practical issue. But I think it's an interesting write-up. I think it's worth checking out if you want to look at hitting antiviruses. I don't really have too many more thoughts on it though. Did you have anything more on that, Z?
I mean, it actually talks about two issues. So we just talked about the registry key overwriting. The other thing, and it just touches on this actually really briefly. Actually, this is about all it talks about though, is just abusing symlinks with antiviruses. So you tell the antivirus to scan whatever file that you control, and it's just your normal everyday malicious file. Tell it to scan it. Once it's read the file into memory, do a symlink to a protected protected binary or protected file, and since it's already read the file, it's just going to go back and basically go and delete your protected file afterwards, like a talk to issue, a time of check, time of use.
Yeah, I saw it,
and it touches on that
but
very briefly, just like basically, hey, it had this issue, and leaves it at that.
Well, I remember reading that, and that is definitely an interesting issue. But did it say that the product actually contained that, or did it just give that as an example of a type of issue you can find in antiviruses in general? Because I
It
didn't
might
see
be
it saying
saying
that it
in
was.
general, but
I couldn't see any things
it
saying
didn't
that
go
it
into any
specifically
detail
hit
about
K7.
that, but it was talking about K7's attack surface here. And it talks about the IPC, which it does go into more detail about. Um, but yeah, fine, fair point. Oh no, I mean, if you thought it was a good write-off, fine. I kind of think it's a bit messy. It just kind of, I wouldn't recommend it, but
You wouldn't recommend it, okay?
no,
Why is that?
I'm not. Well, it's what I was just saying. I thought it was kind of a bit messy, a little bit unclear in a lot of areas. Just not really a good introduction to anything. It has a nice little graph overview. That's one thing I guess it has going for. And like to be fair, like I'm not trying to hate on 0x00 and their write-ups. Like I'm not at all. I just don't think that this would be one that I'd recommend is like, oh, you want to get into antivirus stuff? Look at this. I'd probably start elsewhere. There are a number of other antivirus things that we've talked about and write-ups that kind of cover some of your issues, but um
Okay,
yeah.
fair enough. I mean, yeah, I mean, okay, fair. That's a fair point. I mean, even the stuff we were talking about with the Symlink, they don't really make it clear. Like, there are some things that could have been done better. Uh, yeah, I kind of made you repeat yourself there because you cut out for me, so I didn't hear you say the part about it being a bit messy. So that's why, it was kind of weird there. There was kind of a gap there. Um, but yeah, we'll move on to the CVE 2019 11932. Many apps vulnerable. So this actually refers to a double free we've talked about on the podcast before in terms of WhatsApp. So this is a double free and a gift parsing library that WhatsApp uses, but this uh, post is basically saying that there's a lot more than just WhatsApp using it, and they say there could be over 28,400 free Android apps that use the library, and quite a few are using the vulnerable library. So it seems like it's mostly just saying like it's not only WhatsApp affected by the issue. More people should be taking note of it, and somebody actually compiled a list of apps that are using that framework. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and there are some large apps. That said, the list is just here are the apps using the framework. And I think the key thing about WhatsApp is the fact that this is user generated content that can include the malicious GIF. And I'm sure for a lot of these, like, okay, so it actually mentions Instagram there. So, maybe you can do a very similar attack with Instagram. Obviously, there's WhatsApp listed there, but a lot of these other ones, like VStudio Android Camera 360, is that taking any user data to create this, to read like this malicious GIF? Probably not.
That's a fair point, actually. I didn't really
I
think
think with
about
a lot of these, it's not as much of an issue. Like sure, it's using the library, and you should like even if you're using a vulnerable library, but you're not exposing it in any vulnerable way, it's still a good idea to upgrade it anyhow. One, because updating's good, but two is just a simple idea that what can end up happening is you're not using the vulnerable function now, but a year down the line, a new developer comes in, they start writing this function, they're like, oh, I need this feature, oh, this library has this feature, and they implement the vulnerable function. So it might not be present now, but it can be in the future. So like it is a reason for all of those applications to go and update. But I mean, right now, a lot of them probably aren't actually exploitable. I
that.
just wanted
Yeah,
to point out, like, it is a good point, though, like, that WhatsApp issue was not only WhatsApp.
yeah, definitely fair to bring up. Pretty short topic, but we've talked about this exact bug before, so it's kind of a nice throwback to that. And if you're if we have any app developers listening that are using that library, they can fix that. I don't know how many we have that are app developers, but maybe we have some. The other SecList post was another antivirus post actually was Max Secure Antivirus Plus. There was a CVE with insecure permissions, and
Okay,
this one seemed to be
before we jump into it,
okay.
I just want to mention this application name, Max Secure Antivirus Plus.
It's very buzzwordy.
Well, not just buzzwordy. I feel like I have seen this in a pop-up ad and thought that it was malware. I mean, like with a name like that, Max Secure Antivirus Plus. That sounds like malware. That sounds like something that's like, they're trying to sound so good, so you download it and it just tells you about all the viruses you don't have. Well, it tells you that you have all these viruses that you don't.
Which makes me surprised they actually got a CVE for it, because like I've never heard of this product before ever.
Well, we've kind of had the whole CVE discussion. You get a CVE for any piece of software as long as the vendor of the software, well, not even as long as, generally speaking, the vendor of the software needs to agree or state that there was the vulnerability. Like they need to confirm it. That said, if you have a vendor that doesn't respond to you, non-responsive vendors or hostile vendors, it can be validated by another CVE authority. But like as long as it's software, as long as it's there, you can get a CVE for it. Like there's no real hard restrictions on getting CVEs.
That's fair. I mean, yeah.
The issue here like isn't all that interesting, to be fair.
It's very trivial. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's basically insecure permissions on the installation directory, so you can replace DLLs and executables and stuff like that.
Yeah, so their example is you can replace the max SDUI binary, essentially the UI. So it's in like the program files. So that's actually something that was a little bit surprising, though, is that I believe it could sit in program files and still be accessed by a low integrity process. So that surprised me a little bit. But the vuln doesn't do anything to create that. It's just it has its own bad permission set that ends up allowing it. And that's kind of the key thing here is those, like basically all your applications should, like an antivirus, you probably want to have that running with high integrity, which means that low and medium integrity processes or untrusted processes can't actually interact with the process. And if you're not familiar, Windows has several integrity levels that your files and your applications will kind of run at, which range from untrusted or anonymous, low, medium, high, system, and protected. And essentially your files, basically they get that based on things like where they came from. So like downloading something from the internet is going to have a low integrity. Whereas things run or files created by like your default user comes in at medium. I think admin stuff will have will have high, and then obviously there's system for things running at the system level. So like there's those different, and then you can't like do DLL injection or anything across those integrity levels. So that's kind of what's going on here. So this max SDUI exe can basically just be replaced by any application. Now, I do want to show this guy actually has a YouTube video, a proof of concept YouTube video.
Okay, so you're going to show that on stream?
Not really. Did you watch it?
No, I didn't.
Okay, it's
I didn't see it.
Sorry for any ear rape out of that. We've got a system in place that lets us kind of interact on the screen here a little bit, and what ends up happening with that is it removes my ability to pause that YouTube video. So I'm not going to play it, but essentially it reminds me of like, some 12-year-olds like cheat, like I don't know, their Club Penguin cheat video where they want you to download their malware. So they make like this fake cheat video and they have the music playing and they're showing themselves doing this hack. This proof of concept video reminds me of that. It's music playing, notepad text box, highlighting text on it to say what they want because they won't talk. Yeah, it's very much feeling like that.
I would have gone with how to get free XSATs example. But yeah, that refers to like an XSAT chat platform we used to be on. It was in Flash. But yeah, I mean, I will say like this type of issue being present in something as critical as an antivirus makes me really question how effective or like using this antivirus ever, just because of like this is such a low hanging fruit issue. You feel like this would be the kind of thing that would be like one of the first things you do when you're deploying an antivirus.
Yeah, I
So
mean, it's I agree. At the same time, I'm not entirely convinced it is a real antivirus.
probably not.
It seems to be based on the video, like it looks like it is, but I mean, just the name itself just seems sketchy, and yeah, it is a really simple issue.
Yeah.
It actually includes some C code for it.
I found that weird. Like, why use C code for demonstrating that you can replace a DLL or an EXE?
Yeah, like all it does is copies, and it has a bunch of sleeps. I think it's so you can have, the cool text box.
I literally think that's it too. I was thinking that too. I'm like, you just wrote C to like make it look more impactful. But yeah. Alrighty, so we'll talk about an issue that affects a more used product, which is Synology DSM. So the title is SSD Advisory Synology DSM Remote Command Injection. So
just before anybody thinks they're SSD, not solid state.
Completely no, secure team, secure disclosure.
Yes, I just wanted to make that mention really quickly.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So it's an issue in the Synology's Disk Station Manager, which is used for like network attached storage and stuff like that. So it's a remote command injection, but it is authenticated, which I think is an important point. Authenticated is quite a lower severity
authentication
issue.
And administrative group.
Oh, okay, I didn't catch the administrative group part.
Yeah, it's well, so there's two different features. Maybe I'm wrong. At least one of them requires the administrative access. That's it. Like the issue here is that the thing will create configuration files, a conf file, that gets executed in your shell. So it's literally just a bunch of key value things. So key equals value for another one. So we'll put like, what's your user equals quote, whatever user you provided into this HTTP request to set that. And that ends up being executed as part of a shell script. So it just kind of puts those variables into the environment. So if you put backticks in there, you can have code execution. They don't demonstrate, but presumably you can do the $sign blocks to also get code execution. Simple enough to understand, though, is just injecting those backticks into that. That said, they do have some protection on the user example I gave, but the issue also exists in the MTU field. But yet another restriction on that, you're limited to 8 characters.
Yeah, so quite a limited vector. It's authenticated and only 8 characters. So
yeah, I mean, so you can maybe do something with that. Like you would want to echo. You would probably want to build up a shell script to then execute. Like you would want to echo into a file or like get something into a file that you can then actually use.
That's a good way to exploit it, yeah.
I don't know how much you like. 8 characters is really tough.
But writing bit by bit with something like echo, you could probably do like even one byte at a time, right?
So I'm just gonna type here quickly. Yeah, so echo A into A is 8 characters. No quotes, no space between, like on the redirect. That's 8 characters. So you're not going to be able to use any command characters. Echo doesn't really do new lines. You have to do printf for that. Or a similar command. I don't know, 8? It almost feels like you maybe do a CTF challenge on that.
Yeah, I know.
Like they're almost certainly. I mean, 8 characters, it feels like enough that you can definitely do something. But I don't have an immediate thought on like this is exactly what you can do.
One hypothetical is like, could you like you're saying you need administrator access anyway, and presumably one thing that like administrators can do is create accounts, and you can control the user field. I wonder if you can, because user, it's an environment variable, right? So if
User's
you
in the
can,
config, but it's already protected against this attack. This
yeah,
attack was already found in user.
yeah, but what I was thinking of is you could set the user to like a command or something, and then use that in the
Gotcha.
command injection to get more than 8 characters to work with. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah,
I
no,
wonder if you could do something
you
like
could
that.
connect things like that. Actually, that's a good idea. That's actually a common trick, is to use or to link up with other data. So especially if they're close together. But there are other ways you could use it, like as you kind of said, just echo, or I guess you want to do echo. But yeah, no, there's probably some way you could use those other variables too.
Yeah, but like you said, would be an awesome CTF challenge.
I don't know if I'd go that far. It would be a fun CTF challenge. It might just feel a bit. I don't know. It really depends on what the solution ends up being to it. Like, there might be some really stupid thing that we're just not coming up with right now that makes it quite easy.
That's a
Like,
good point.
SA. Like, if you know your file descriptor for your for that thing, example, like if you could feed it back itself. But no, I don't think you'd be able to do that. I was thinking of using just like another file descriptor to input into something, like redirecting the input.
Okay.
Like either using something like a dup2 to move.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a fun challenge, but the solution might not be very interesting. It really depends on what we come up with.
Yeah. But
Either
yeah,
way, definitely
maybe
a
we'll make
low
a CTF
severity
challenge out
issue.
of it. Yeah, so it's definitely an issue, but not like earth shattering or anything. So we'll get into some research, and our first one is SpoC, spoofing camera fingerprints. So this has to do with attacking neural networks. We do love AI on this podcast. For those of you that are first time listeners, we absolutely love AI. So we're going to be
Yeah,
talking about it
comes
here.
up a bit.
Yeah. So this paper talks about using generative adversarial networks, or GANs, and it talks about how like you can create images from that using pre-existing data sets. So one
Yeah,
example
so
they gave is like changing someone's expression with a given face, set of faces, or something like that. And sorry, you can go ahead there.
Yeah, we've talked about things I've used GANs before. Like that's not new at all.
No,
We don't usually call it out
but
as
it's
being a
saying
GAN.
like it kind of leads into that can be used to create fake images and fake news and stuff like that.
That's what GANs do. That's
Yes.
like, it's not that they can be used for that. That is
Yeah,
what they
but
do.
what
They
this
take a
paper
data set
tackles
and
is
expand it.
how do you tell between like which images are real and which are faked, and that's where the fingerprint part of the title comes in. So it talks about how like certain cameras and stuff like that and devices will leave traces on the images based on like hardware noise and stuff like that, and you can actually use that to kind of identify the device. That's the fingerprint. And there's forensic detectors that can be used to detect in those images to try to see if they're real. But those traces change as technology advances. And from what I can understand from the paper, it's basically trying to see if it can use those traces left by cameras to ascertain if the image is legitimate and if it's not, generated by an adversarial network.
Yeah, I mean, that's.
So did you have any thoughts on the paper, Z?
I kind of feel like it's the wrong path to go after for this issue. So obviously,
Okay.
like, the problem they're trying to solve is, the deep fakes, the fake media being created. This way, if they can identify, okay, it was made by this camera. The thing is, this sort of attribution, knowing what camera was used, like, even when a forensics person actually does that, and they're looking at it, it's just they kind of know the statistics behind what type of camera does this, or what the compression for this camera looks like, or that camera. But it's always going to be kind of statistical. It's always going to be all of these cameras kind of do this. That's kind of how they're made. Um, it's never going to be concrete evidence that X picture was taken by Y without some other mechanism that actually adds some confidence to that. So what this attack goes for is spoofing the camera. It's just showing kind of and sorry, I should say I feel like it's the wrong path to take in terms of trying to detect the camera. Like in that sense, I feel like that's the wrong path. Obviously this paper itself is looking at just spoofing it, which I mean is the right attack for that. Basically like, yeah, it's possible to spoof the attacks, but I don't think there's any real option besides being able to spoof it, because like I said, attribution like this is always kind of going to be based off of what's there. It's not really any sort of concrete piece. Like I think a better idea would be signed pictures. Maybe cameras will sign the pictures that they take, such that if they didn't get tampered with, it's known that they're tampered with because the signatures don't match. Of course, then if you're able to leak the if you're able to leak the camera's key or something, then that doesn't really help. Like there are problems with that, but I think that type of solution is probably going to be a better route than this would, or than trying to do this forensics would.
Yeah, so it seemed like what this paper brought new to the table is they said that there are like other people looking into trying to generate these traces and spoof the fingerprints. But they said that a lot of the other papers, they require knowledge of the classifier that's being used. But their attack can essentially be used in like a black box scenario. They don't require knowledge about the classifier. They just require some like images to work with from the target as a data set. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Although, when you do look at their kind of the results down at the bottom here, they generally had the best results when they had images from their target architecture and comparing it with trying to fake it on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think their numbers are fair considering it's a black box scenario. Like you said, the numbers are way better when you're
using this Bondi 2017, and most of the images only really worked when being tested against Bondi 2017, for example. So if you look at kind of what I brought up there with the uncompressed images, Bondi 2017, when that's their target arc, 96%, 63%, 74%, and 100%.
Yeah,
everything
and then
else
there's
though,
a 67.
Well, but look at all of the other options there using Bondi 2017 as their target again. When they compared whatever was generated for that on Tuama, or Exception or Inception.
Okay, this table's a little bit weird the way it's written, so it was a bit confusing to me. I think I see a bit more of what you're saying now.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, there are some that kind of work, but I think one of the issues here is that these fakes seem to, even though they don't necessarily need to know the classifier, and that's their last thing, their ensemble, that's where they kind of target everything, or they use a bunch of different things, and that's obviously a lot lower. 11%, 5%, 12%. Like a lot lower when they do that, when they use kind of when they train it on everything.
Okay. I mean, I'll say I kind of like this paper just because it seemed to be pretty it's something we've talked about a little bit lately, but it's been more accessible. It talks pretty. It's pretty easy to understand what's going on, at least at the high level. They give a good high level overview of what's happening with camera spoofing and stuff like that, which I thought was cool. I think it's a very accessible paper.
Yeah, oh, definitely. It's a pretty solid paper, I think. I guess I was going to say it's kind of short, but it reads pretty well. I didn't feel like it was just droning on at any point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it is 14 pages, so it's not that short. We've got shorter, I think, coming up.
I think our next one's actually shorter.
Yeah, but I mean, I just kind of hold that. I think doing this. Well, yeah, I guess you're not able to hear me still, but I was saying my final thoughts are like I just don't think it's the right, like, doing camera detection. I don't think is going to solve the problem. So yeah, we can spoof it. I think we're going to continue to be able to spoof it. Yeah, that's kind of my thing. Is I just don't think trying to detect what camera something was taken with is really the right path to detecting tampered data or tampered media.
Okay, fair enough. So our next white paper is defending against adversarial machine learning. So this one looked at a variety of classification algorithms, which I'll be honest, I'm not too familiar with. This one is a bit less accessible than the last paper. I
Oh,
kind of struggled reading
it's
through
a
this
lot
one.
less accessible.
Yeah, I should. Yeah, not a bit. It is a lot less accessible. So it talked about. I think the major ones they talked about was like radial basis function support vector machines and linear support vector machines and feed forward neural networks.
Yeah,
And it was
yes.
trying to.
I'm gonna interrupt you here and just say they talk about a few different techniques in terms of obviously the goal there from the title is defending against adversarial machine learning. They do talk about a few techniques. One is feature pruning, where they do component or what they call principal component analysis. Essentially, the idea there is figuring out what features to look for in an image. I'm getting some feedback from you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll try to
Uh,
fix it.
yeah. Anyway, so with that, what they're looking for is what features are or have the biggest effect on, or basically what features are the most effective in getting rid of anything else that's trying to look for. Basically, limiting what it's looking for to just a few things. And then they use that also to switch between features. So rather than just having one model that's trained on and like the same image will always kind of, well, ideally they should always have the same result, but they'll have different models, different confidence levels, or different models that they can run the same image through, or different features that it'll look for. So by changing that, then when you kind of give it one image and then another image to see what it detects it as and try and figure out the limits of that detection, because it's changing the features that are being looked at. Um, Basically, it'll be harder for somebody to pull out or to change or to adversely affect those models because it keeps changing on them. To have it randomly move between these different features that it's looking for. And then the last thing is the detection of abnormal input, where you kind of have this idea of all your normal input kind of falls within this curve. So when you start seeing a distribution of inputs that are different from that are um, basically that don't match the expected distribution, then the system can recognize that the input is different and kind of react to that. That's where what Spectre was just mentioning, the radical basis function support vector machine comes in. That's where the linear support, and that's just two different ways of calculating kind of the difference between two things. So like the radial is kind of like your distance from the origin to some fixed point, and then the last one is using a feed forward neural network as its model for doing that detection of abnormal as the base model. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely getting. I can't go too deep here because this is not an area of expertise. And like I said, very dense paper.
Yeah. So I just before I go on, are you still getting feedback from me or no?
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure that was solved before I spoke. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a pretty dense paper, and I did find like a few weird things. I remember I brought it up to you, and I think I'll bring it up on here too, because they have a table here. So they have like a results section towards the conclusion on page 5, and they have all these tables of their results. So they have like a list of algorithms, and then the three algorithms they were testing and their accuracies. And for like radial basis, or actually I should say for the linear support vector machines, they say that it's affected more by the lack of normalization than it is by the lack of standardization. And it doesn't really seem to match up with their table, because if you look at their table, their normalization and standardization for LSVM, assuming 0.62 is a typo, is 0.62. And then with normalization, it's 0.29, but with standardization, it's 0.52, which indicates that standardization is actually more important than normalization is, unless there's a typo there, which you were thinking there might be.
Well, one of the things that seems a little bit weird to me is the fact that it dropped below 0.5. So when you have anything below point, and they do this in a few places, so obviously that's like intended. but you can just flip it. Return negative when you would return positive type deal. And suddenly your detection rate goes up.
Yeah. So the results seem kind of weird. They're kind of... I
imagine this is more just... No, I don't want to say it's not trustworthy. I think it's more just our not understanding it.
Okay, yeah,
I would rather put the blame on myself on this one than try and state the paper as being faulty. I mean, I struggle through this paper. I thought I learned a good bit about some of the techniques for the adversarial, which I already kind of summarized those few techniques I used. I thought that was interesting. When it comes down to a lot of the statistics here that they're going through, it's definitely getting beyond me. So I would rather kind of put the blame here just on... I'm probably misunderstanding something and not on the authors having an issue. I mean, it very well could be an issue. I mean, these are... So we look at archive for our papers, which is a pre-release publication system. So it's before these things have necessarily gone through all of the peer review and everything else. So it's definitely possible things kind of slipped through. They looked at something, they wrote that line, and nobody really double-checked it yet. Like, that's definitely possible. Although I do note that we are on a V1, which means this isn't quite the first paper. This is their... I usually when I see V1 added, it is actually their second paper. I know that seems a little bit... Yeah, I don't see any mention on this in here about it, but...
Okay. I mean, you're right. Like, I feel like I felt like that too, that it was probably me as misunderstanding something. That being said, like that 062 they have in the LSVM column does indicate that, there's at least one typo that went through. So maybe there is a bit of a lack of proofreading in the results section. But yeah, like it could be a case of, our knowledge, not being able to interpret the tables as well as, the paper wants us to, kind of thing. But yeah, so that's a fair point.
Yeah, that said, I will kind of just jump in there and say that on average with this, when you do look at kind of the final results, you do see at least you're seeing 20+% jumps when you start using the term frequency stuff. When you do the standard, that's the TF-IDF acronym in there. That's term frequency, inverse document frequency. Basically a numerical statistic to reflect how important a certain character is in what they're analyzing. 'Cause this is what do they use? Author? This is the authorship one, right? Yeah, so the author attribution system is what they're using, or what this using for it. So it's basically like somebody writes something and trying to attribute the author to it, like who wrote that. So what the TF-IDF thing is basically just reflecting how important a specific letter or a specific character in the writing is, and kind of setting some restrictions on how it treats certain letters, some letters being more important than others. I'm definitely getting feedback from you still, Spectre.
Really? Damn it. Okay. I'll try to fix that. Is it gone now though? Or do I have to... Okay. Yeah, I mean, what makes these papers a little bit hard to read, it's definitely not this specific paper's fault. It's in general in AI. There are so many, obscure acronyms that it's so hard to keep track of them. Even when they define them, you basically have to, put a window or, a notepad open of, all the definitions to be able to read the paper.
I mean, I feel like that's more just a lack of domain knowledge. I mean, there's acronyms though with an exploit dev, but we know what ASLR means. We know what dep is, NX.
Not nearly as many though. That's what I mean. It's there's a lot more in AI than there is in pretty much any other field we look at.
Part of that is just because of math. ANOVA is used in here, which is analysis of variance. It's just a math term. And I mean, mathematicians in general like their single letter variables and all of that too. So there's that.
Yeah, fair point.
And obviously this is very stats heavy.
Yeah.
This paper. And I mean, machine learning in general is applied statistics.
Yeah. But I will say the next paper we're going to cover, which is Can Attention Maps Improve Adversarial Robustness? I like this paper a lot more. I found it way more accessible to people not familiar with, or not too familiar with AI. I don't know what you thought about it, but I thought this paper was like, it's a short and sweet paper. It's only 5 pages. So it talks about,
Oh, do you know what this might have been? Do they do the handwriting analysis on this one? So I
yes,
remember
they
this.
do.
Okay, so I was mistaken when I spoke with the last paper. They were just doing authorship of text, not of the writing. I had these two kind of mixed up a bit.
Oh, okay, no problem. But yeah, so this one talks about using masks to protect against like adversarial attacks. And you were saying you found this interesting because it's kind of like the other side of the coin compared to most white papers we cover, because this is talking more about defending against those types of attacks instead of performing them.
Yeah, and I mean, just to be clear, when we talk about masks, it's not wearing a mask or anything. This is the idea being that it performs before it starts
Superheroes.
trying to detect what like before it tries to classify a particular image. What it will do instead is it'll look for where your attention on that image would be. So the one example down here is this sign. Like you kind of have that image, it has the background. You kind of figure out what the foreground of the image is, and then you run classification on just the foreground. So with a lot of these adversarial attacks, we're just kind of messing with the whole image that you see. The idea here is that if you take just the foreground, if you do an attention mask, or where your attention would be on the image, you mask everything else out and do the analysis just on that it might make the system more robust against those adversarial attacks. So that's kind of what it's going after, is trying to do that, and the results weren't all that bad. End result generally was seeing 20, I think they say 21.8% improvement in accuracy when they tested after training it like that with adversarial images.
Sorry, can you just repeat what you just said last? Because I cut out really hard there, so I just wanted to hear what you said there.
It was 21.8% accuracy improvement doing this.
Yeah, I mean, so they had 2 types of data sets, right? They had the MS Coco and the GTSRB IC, like stop sign or whatever it is. And the results I thought were kind of interesting between those two, because the MS Coco set had you were saying like a 21.8% in adversarial, but in normal scenarios it was only 1.6%. But in the GTSRB, it was kind of the opposite. It was a 23 in normal and only 1.7 in adversarial, which I thought was weird. It was kind of like an inverse thing, where it was like way more effective in the Coco dataset than it was in the GTSRB dataset.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to say about that. That's what it was.
Yeah, I just thought it was kind of an interesting point, like why it was more effective on one than the other. I couldn't really find too much about that, but that was just one interesting point that I noticed. But they say it's a starting point. They say that more work needs to be done on like verifying the effect of the foreground attention and stuff like that. And of course, like developing a more reliable to extract those masks, because they say that their method is kind of like with stop signs and stuff like that. It's a bit easier than it is with some other types of images you might be handling in AI. So overall, I think it was a pretty nice short paper. Like I said, a lot more accessible than the last one we talked about. So I definitely say it's worth a read if you're interested in that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's worth a read, I guess. I'm not going to disagree. At the same time, the principle's pretty simple.
It is, but I think it's still interesting. It's still a value,
But I mean, that's why they listen to us talk about it, so they don't have to read all of it.
Fair enough. Fair point. But yeah, so we'll move on to some tools. So you kind of added this one last minute, the Hidviz. So did you manage to look at this one too much for the stream, or did
No, but
you?
I did see that it was released here, and I mean, it is something like USB tools in general are kind of either expensive or hard to get around to. Obviously, the more expensive things are, your hardware for intercepting USB stuff. This is very much focused on your HID devices, so your human interface devices. Um, Nonetheless, I mean, it's just an interest tool. Might be useful for doing some reverse engineering of human interface devices. So I kind of just want to drop it here. Looks like I'm pretty sure they did a new release of it. Obviously this came out some years ago. Uh, I wasn't familiar with it.
Neither was I. It looks very cool. And I was saying a little before the podcast that I think I could see myself using this, and where I could see myself using this is I was interested in trying to figure out like the Guitar Hero guitar protocols and stuff like that, and I feel like this might be useful for that. This seems like kind of a good application. Because like I have a bunch of Guitar Hero guitars. Because for those of you, like some of you who like follow me on Twitter and stuff, you'll notice I was working on actually a Guitar Hero clone, and I have a lot of like guitars that don't have dongles, so I was kind of wondering if I could like reverse them and figure out how to kind of create a de facto dongle, and this might be worth looking into for something like that. So I might
Yeah, I mean
actually
that
use this
seems
program.
like the idea behind it, or like that seems like kind of the intended purpose.
Yeah. So
Obviously,
I think it'll be really cool.
they mention a few other things like medical equipment, but clearly, at least one of their initial thoughts is the USB joysticks and stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, not too much on that, but I do think I will actually be checking that out and downloading it. So, maybe I'll talk about my experiences with it on the next podcast or something. But we'll move on to the IDA evaluation version. So, Ilfax, I think I'm saying that right. I might be mispronouncing it. But he tweeted out on Twitter that they put out a new evaluation version, like a demo, with the x64 decompiler. One thing I did want to ask though, Z, is I thought IDA Free already came with this in 7.0. Am I wrong?
I think you're wrong. As far as I'm aware, none of the demos have ever come with a decompiler.
Okay,
And I
so
did look at the
okay.
archive because he did mention that as like archive.org. Looking back on this, none of them mentioned the decompiler.
I looked at that too, yeah, but I guess I was just crazy. I thought it had it like I thought it only worked with 64-bit binaries because with IDA Free you can't load 32-bit. But I thought they shipped the basic decompiler with free version, but I guess I was wrong.
I mean, as far as I know, they haven't. That said, I've had IDA Pro for the last, like, from 7.0. I had IDA Pro through work, so, I mean, I wasn't looking at what was offered with the free, so it's possible I'm mistaken. But as far as I'm aware, no, none of them have come with the decompiler before.
Okay. So yeah, they mentioned some restrictions. It only works with the 8086 family. It comes with the x64 decompiler, and it is for corporate users. They say the demo is only accessible to corporate users, so you have to have like an email address that's non-public. You can't be like a Gmail address or a
I
Hotmail
mean,
address
that's
or anything like
usually
that.
not that difficult, though. I mean, a lot of us are going to own our own domains or whatever, so you have an email that you can use.
Yeah, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Um, but I mean, I saw a lot of people. A lot of people were actually not too. They were a bit ripping on it a little bit, just because like, especially with Ghidra out now, where you get a decompiler for a bunch of different arcs for free. It kind of just feels like IDA's trying to push something that's inferior and to free alternatives just to try to steal back some of the spotlight. You know
Well,
what I
do you
mean?
think that IDA's decompiler is inferior?
From what I've worked with, it is.
Okay,
But
fair
that
enough.
being
I mean,
said,
we talked about it quite a bit during episode 1.
that being said, I mean, IDA's always been a lot better when it comes to Windows binaries. I think that's kind of their strong suit. PE
Yeah.
files, they have a lot of like signatures and stuff
Well,
for Windows API.
I think that was kind of the thing with the Ghidra that when we were talking about back on episode 1 was that Ghidra, like, I kind of liked it more, but you needed to do a little bit more setup with it. So, like, it knew about some of the Windows libraries, so it knew about certain, symbols and stuff. Whereas IDA had things like that kind of built right in. And when you put them both like that, I felt like they were more equal. Like when you kind of gave them both the same starting point.
Okay. I mean, I've found a lot of mistakes in decompiler output in IDA compared to Ghidra. That being said, I mean that could just be limited to sample size as well. Obviously, that's anecdotal. I look mostly at like kernel stuff, and you'll encounter a lot of instructions and stuff in kernels that you don't really encounter in userland. So that might just be a case of like something I run into that not a lot of other people run into. So I don't want to say like for sure that Gitra's decompiler is better, but for me, I found it that it's better when I've used it.
Yeah, I mean I don't really want to come down on either side, to be fair.
Okay.
Um, Mostly because I haven't had I mean I've had enough time to play around with Ghidras. I just haven't played around with Ghidras enough. Although Halsey does mention in chat that it's inferior. That was Ida, I believe, saying Ida was inferior.
2 against 1, you lose. I'm just kidding.
No,
But
I mean, and I'm willing to accept that. Like, this is that, like, a lot of what Hexray's Ida's been doing lately is absolutely related to Ghidra's release.
yep,
I
they're
mean,
getting under the skin.
I mean, they've kind of just gotten comfortable sitting there because they were the de facto tool, and now that is being challenged by a free tool.
And that's what a lot of people are saying is like that's why people are upset with Hexrays is like they had basically the monopoly for so long that they didn't really want to do any more innovation. Like a lot of people were saying like even IDA 7 feels like it's like 90s software. Like it hasn't really evolved much over the last couple of years. And now instead of trying to evolve to keep up with Ghidra, it's basically just
I mean, it's
saying,
not like
here, try
Ghidra
our
feels
demo.
that advanced. It's not like Ghidra's UI is, well, I mean, it's Java.
Oh, it's definitely it's a worse user experience, but I mean like
Oh, I
they
know
feel
what
like
you
they've
mean,
kind
though.
of been left in the dust in features.
There's kind of the hex race has kind of had the I guess I'm trying to think of a good way to phrase it, but basically the goodwill is gone.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the whole thing with AMD and Intel going on too. With Intel had the top position, they decided to just kind of sit there with it. That's the same thing that IDA's done, and people were kind of getting tired of it already. They kind of lost that goodwill people had towards them because they were the de facto tool, and they've just proven that they're not good stewards to the community. So just because of that, I would kind of drop it off as. I mean, it's nice they're putting out the demo compiler. Great, like I'm not complaining about that. That said, I mean, now that I no longer have access to IDA through work, like I have no plan to buy it. I do plan to start trying to use Ghidra as my primary driver. And having the demo doesn't really change that.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like kind of like more of a PR thing. It doesn't feel like it's too useful. I mean, the decompiler is cool that they're making that as a free demo, but I mean,
Yeah, I don't know
most people using IDA,
how
honestly,
locked
if they're
down
not
this
part
is
of a
going to be.
corporation, they're pirating it anyway. So they already have that decompiler, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder I didn't look at what the restrictions are going to be, because obviously it's not going to be the full feature decompiler. There are going to be limits on it.
Yeah, I don't think they went too specific on that. They left that kind of up in the air. But yeah, we can move on to the Windows Terminal release, which is our last topic. So
Yeah,
the Windows Terminal preview was updated for 0.7. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and I think we might have really briefly talked about the Windows Terminal on episode 11. I want to say I think it was like the last one before we went on our break this summer.
I think we did. Yeah.
I think that's where it was. Anyway, so the new terminal here has actually brought in some kind of interesting features. The main thing is, and I'm actually going to go ahead and show my desktop here. There we go. Sorry, I can't make the text any bigger for it to be too readable. It doesn't really matter. The main thing, though, that they've changed here with the terminal, though, is you've got, or at least the things I care about, are obviously you've got the tabs. You can reorder them, which you weren't able to do before.
I've wanted that forever.
The other thing, though, is that they've introduced very similar to like Tmux or something where you can split your window. So, I can have like three kind of tabs, or not tabs open, but three panes open. They've created kind of that pane system. You can resize them. Basically do what you'd expect to be able to do with the pane system. And I mean, I like that. I've used Tmux before. Obviously, there are other options. There's Screen. I'm sure there's other managers that do similar things, but this is one thing that I'm really happy to see come to Windows, to be able to have this sort of terminal control.
Yeah, I always thought, like, I've used Windows Terminal before, and I've always thought how stupid it was that it didn't have tab reordering from the get-go. So it's good that it finally got it, because it was pretty annoying, like, not being able to reorder tabs. It's still, I don't know if this issue fixed it. Maybe you can test it on the stream, actually. It does have some issues of where if you have too many tabs and it overflows the width of the window, you can't access the tabs.
It still has that. I think it's a little bit better. But I do remember, so it does have, I guess I'll bring it back. Try and bring it back up here. So it does have kind of basically this little area on the top. I'm not sure if it had the little arrows before for going between them.
But I don't think it did. I don't remember that.
Yeah, so it does have that, but it's a little bit buggy. Actually, if you were watching the stream, I just had kind of the little arrows were like half or like a third of the way across my screen. Now it's all the way on the other end. It doesn't resize very well. It would seem. Let's see if that. Yeah, so when I like maximize, it still keeps that smaller size. So that's obviously, I'd say that's probably a little bug, although that does kind of get fixed if I add a new tab. It looks like I'm able to keep accessing everything, so I'm going to say it looks like that bug has been fixed. Okay. That said, I haven't experienced this. I actually just pulled down this preview or this preview version this morning. Before that, I normally just use like Commander.
Yeah, that's what I use as well.
But I mean, I like this. I like the feel of this. I like the fact that it's got the that they've made Bash feel like a little bit more of a first-class citizen. They've also got the Azure Cloud Shells, something you can access in the normal command prompt. That's actually all customizable in the settings. You can just enter whatever you want for that. But oh no, I mean, I'm really happy to have the panes. That's a big thing for me. That's really useful.
I mean, I think there's still some big bugs they have to fix. And one thing I actually didn't even notice on first read through that I'm noticing now that I think we should bring up is the reordering tabs thing. It apparently doesn't work if you run the terminal as administrator. It'll crash if you do that, which is a kind of a weird bug. So
yeah, I mean, actually, I didn't realize that was written on there. But I actually had that happen earlier when I was playing around with it. I had it crash me and didn't think much of it because it didn't crash again, but that was probably why.
Yeah, which is kind of a deal breaker. Like sometimes you do need to run, command prompt as administrator if you want to do certain things. I mean, I like the way this is going. I like the feel of it, but it's still got a few too many bugs for me to use it as my daily driver kind of thing. I think I'm going to stick with Commander until they fix some more issues.
Yeah, I mean, the tab reordering isn't actually that big of a deal to me. Especially since most of the time I am only in user land, like I'm not running as admin.
Yeah.
Or when I do, I usually want my admin one separate anyhow. So like it will be a separate terminal, a separate window, just so I don't accidentally start doing things in admin. But that's just me.
Yeah. So, I mean, they do have some bug fixes in there, and, it's definitely getting some love. It's getting some attention, so I think...
these are steps in the right direction, for sure.
Yeah, and to be fair, it is version 0.7. It's not at 1.0
Yeah, it is
yet,
preview.
So, yeah. So I think by the time it does get to 1.0, or like a final release, I think it'll be pretty nice. But on the preview side, I don't think I'm going to be using it quite yet. I think it still has a little bit of a ways to go.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. All right, so that's pretty much all the topics we had for today. Again, we'll we'll end off the stream by saying we will be doing the Friday streams again. I'm going to be doing the kernel debugging stream on Friday because, we're going to be continuing on that. I just need to pull down some things to get that working because we ran into a roadblock last Friday. But yeah, so if you're interested in that, that'll be running at 8 or 9 Eastern, which is like what, 6 or 7 Central, I want to say.
Well,
is that about right?
Central, no.
Or sorry, not Central, Pacific.
Yeah, I mean Pacific.
Yeah, Pacific. So I'm not too good with time zones, but 8 or 9 Eastern is when I'm planning to do that.
Yeah, if you really want the alerts, join the Discord. Links down below for that. That way you can get the alerts when we go live, or Twitter or something. That way, if we don't know when we want to go live, you can get it through that. And I do encourage you guys, join the Discord. We are trying to have a bit of a community around this place to kind of chat about whatever. Well, maybe not whatever, but exploit dev, all of that. Both myself and Spectre are active on our Discord and on Discord in general.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, go ahead and you can also go to our website and our blog. It has all the links there. But yeah, join us in our Discord, man. You can ask any questions or anything like that, and maybe even bring up some topics that you want covered on the stream. We can consider doing that too. But I think that's pretty much everything. So we'll see you guys either on the Friday stream if you guys want to tune to that, or on the next podcast, which is next Monday, and we'll see you guys then.